Let us now understand the meaning of inferential statistics. Most of the research which is carried out is on the sample selected from the population, and the results which we obtain are with respect to the sample, but these findings need to be generalized for the population, or we need to establish how much confidence can we place in the sample study and generalize the findings to the population. So inferential statistics helps the researcher in inferring about the parameters on the basis of statistics. So whatever measures you calculate on the basis of the sample are referred to as statistics, and the measures of population referred to as parameter. There are three underlying concepts which need to be understood to understand the concept of inferential statistics. One is standard error of mean. If you draw number of samples from the population and you try to find out the standard deviation of the distribution of sample means, that is actually referred to as standard error of mean. In other words, you can say it refers to the standard deviation of the population. The second concept is the hypothesis testing. The researcher tries to formulate hypotheses, and these hypotheses can be null hypothesis or alternate hypothesis, and under the alternate hypothesis it can be directional hypothesis or non-directional hypothesis. So when we use inferential statistics, we are likely to say what is the probability of getting the results. We try to accept or reject the hypothesis, and it is a process of decision making. And once you set a probability level, either you set a 0.05 level of significance where you can place a confidence of 95%, or if you set the level of significance at 0.01, you place the confidence up to 99%. In other words, one can say if the same study is repeated 100 times, there is only one chance that the results would vary. And if we set 0.05 as a level of significance, we can say that there are only 5 chances that results would vary. So the researcher, while setting the probability level, tries to compare the calculated results with the standard results and try to either accept or reject the hypothesis. And two types of errors can be committed. Type 1 error, when you reject null hypothesis when actually it is true, it is said to be a case of type 1 error. And type 2 error refers to when you accept the null hypothesis when it is actually false. So when the researcher is setting the level of probability, if you set a very small level of probability that you select 0.001 as your level of significance, then chances are that you will never reject the null hypothesis. But if you set the probability level as 0.001, you increase the chances of type 2 error. So the researcher needs to have a balanced approach and set a level of significance where you reduce the chances of both type 1 and type 2 error. The selection of inferential statistics would depend upon three important factors: the nature of variables, the objectives of study, and hypotheses formulated for the study. The nature of variables can be either on a nominal scale, ordinal scale, interval scale, or ratio scale. Nominal represents the category name. When you say male and female, it is only a category name, and a person who falls in one category has no chances to go to another category. This is where the real or natural dichotomy exists. But you can also have scores where you can provide for artificial dichotomy. Say you have scores of students, now you can decide how many students score above 75, between 50 to 75, and below 50. So you set a criteria and then you try to create dichotomy, or it is not dichotomy, but you are trying to categorize into three categories. So you can have categorization of the sample into three broad categories. Ordinal scale represents where we are trying to rank people, and you can compare the two scores and you can say which one is larger and which one is smaller. And you can rank the people on the basis of height, weight, achievement, teaching effectiveness, and so on. So you are interested in the magnitude, and most of the variables which we take into account in social sciences are on interval scale. Whether you talk about intelligence, you talk about achievement, you have in job satisfaction, emotional intelligence, stress, and so on, all these scores can be represented on an interval scale. So interval scale is one where the difference between 2 points on the scale is equal. So difference between 1 and 2 is equal to difference between 19 and 20. Ratio scale is one where we have absolute 0 and the value cannot go beyond 0. So you have weight, height, length, and here A upon B is equal to C upon D. If the data satisfy that condition, then data is on the ratio scale. But most of the variables which we deal with are on interval scale. So the first thing which will determine which technique needs to be used depend upon the scale of measurement. The second is the objectives of study. For example, if you are interested in to determine the relationship between emotional intelligence and job satisfaction of employees, a clear indication is there that you need to calculate the correlation. If you are trying to have the objective to study the differences in job satisfaction of employees at varied levels of emotional intelligence, it simply gives you an idea that you need to go in for significance of differences between means of the two groups or three groups. If you are trying to categorize the group on the basis of emotional intelligence into high and low, then two groups would exist. If you are trying to have three groups, high, average, and low on emotional intelligence, then you need to go in for the three groups comparison. So objectives of the study are to be taken into account while finalizing the technique of inferential statistics. Another factor which can affect the selection of the technique are the hypotheses of study. The hypothesis, as you have already learned, can be null hypothesis or alternate hypothesis, and under the alternate hypothesis, the hypothesis can be non-directional or directional hypothesis. Now here you can see when we are interested in establishing the relationship between two variables, the null hypothesis would state there is no correlation between the emotional intelligence and job satisfaction of employees. The non directional hypothesis would state there is a correlation between emotional intelligence and job satisfaction of employees, but the direction of relationship is not indicated. The directional hypothesis, on the other hand, says there is a positive correlation between emotional intelligence and job satisfaction of employees. So it states the direction of the hypothesis. Likewise, if your hypotheses are with respect to the comparison between two or more than two group means, then the null hypothesis would state there is no significant difference in the job satisfaction of employees at varied levels of emotional intelligence. And non-directional hypothesis would state there is significant difference in the job satisfaction of employees at varied levels of emotional intelligence, but it doesn't state whether the employees with higher level of emotional intelligence will show higher level of job satisfaction or not. The directional hypothesis, on the other hand, states that employees with higher levels of emotional intelligence show significantly higher job satisfaction than those with lower levels of emotional intelligence. So, when you look at how hypotheses are important, that means area of rejection, if it is a non-directional hypothesis or a null hypothesis, area of rejection of the hypothesis would lie both on positive and negative side. But if you have formulated directional hypothesis, the area of rejection would lie only on one side of the curve. So it is important that hypotheses are taken into consideration while setting the level of significance for any particular statistical technique and then interpreting the results. In nutshell, we can say that there are three important factors which need to be taken into consideration while selecting the inferential statistics technique and interpreting the results, and these include the nature of variables, that is whether the scale of measurement is nominal, ordinal, interval or ratio, and what are the objectives of study, and thirdly, what hypotheses have been formulated by the researcher.